Hey there, gang. What I'd like to do today is make a video and have a conversation with you guys regarding Chucky's perk batteries included, as well as the nerf that is coming up to it very early in the next upcoming patch. Now, for those that don't know what batteries included is and what it does, it provides you a 5% haste bonus when you are within a 12-meter radius of a completed generator. Now, mind you, this is a radius, which means that when you have an object in the center of something, one side of that object is the radius. So both sides give you a diameter. And this means that the 12-meter radius is essentially that 24-meter diameter. Now, circular math is going to give you a more funky number, but ultimately, what you have there, the circumference, is a deceptively larger zone for you to get that benefit than what some might initially consider. And this gives it a lot of versatility. You're able to use it in a lot of maps because not only does that radius, become a diameter on a horizontal plane, it also, in a vertical level, it goes to floors above you. You have plenty of maps that have multiple floors, first floor, second floor, and that means that you are able to take advantage of a completed generator that isn't even on the same floor as you to get that speed boost both when you are transitioning between chases and also when you are mid-chase. And that is one of the ways that makes it actually both viable and practical and powerful. Now, when you look especially across many different maps, I mean, Gideon, for example, Gideon is it's a very small map. So this means that when it comes to each generator providing you a more prevalent area of being able to get this speed boost and then transition between different completed generators, you're able to do that much easier. Given that it's a vertical map, you're able to do this as well on different floors. And this is also great even on parts of the map that where it wouldn't otherwise be as beneficial, right? So like the corners of Gideon, even though in the corner you wouldn't be able to get benefit from it unless you go to that corner. Some of the strongest pallets that survivors will plan on using mid-chase, especially when they're injured, are those corners of the map. And this means you can use that speed boost, such as, especially on Gideon, you have the bathroom tile, that's where the generator is, and above it, you have those two strong pallets. You are able to use batteries included there if they do that generator early. Dead Dog Saloon. Dead Dog Saloon, main building. Survivors love to do that early. That suddenly creates a very powerful zone for you to capitalize on necessary chases when survivors now go to main building. Normally you don't want to go chasing a healthy survivor to Dead Dog Saloon main building, but if they are injured, if you need to tunnel them, if you need to take them out of the game, well, that 5% haste can absolutely be the difference in you having angles for pinks and yellow bottles, for you being able to catch them before they get to certain windows. And that will absolutely be the difference if you take a survivor out early and you being able to kill the rest of the survivors and then win the game. Once that generator gets completed and you get access to that haste bonus, it's not going away. That's basically what makes it so versatile, even just going across different maps. Midwich Elementary. Midwich Elementary, if they do any of the hallway generators, you've got it on both hallways. They do generator at the center, you can now cross easier through the center, play all of the hedge tiles. If they do it at any of the stronger corner tiles, you have it on both floors of the strong corner palettes. Ultimately, it's very great there. The Crotus Pen maps. Let's talk about Crotus Pen. Disturbed Ward. Disturbed Ward typically, it can have up to 2 generators at main building. If they do upstairs at the center, you typically have it for the whole parts of the map, but if they also do the one at the greenhouse, not only do you have it for the center and that, you have it whenever they try to run around the outside of that main building. You know how the greenhouse itself has the window that typically survivors chain when they go back to the secretary desk? Well, now you play that chase better if batteries included is in play. And that is something that I think is very deceptive that some people may not recognize yet. I really do put a lot of value in this. Father Campbell's, especially as a clown main with Perk Synergy and whatnot, but Power Synergy. But again, we'll get to that. Father Campbell's, they do the generator at main. And suddenly you have not only control over the chapel itself, but they also, if they do any of the generators at the circus, you have control of the circus. Think about how some of the generators can be not only at the center of the circus area itself, but also one of them kind of is near some of the strong pallets. You can play off of that. All you need to do, because of the lingering effect, it lingers for 5 seconds. I don't know if I mentioned that. It lingers for 5 seconds whenever you go outside that 12-meter radius. You can play off of that with your as clown and get great value from it. You know, Ormond main building. They if they do that main generator early, which typically survivors will be doing, it's very smart because you do want to split the objectives. You know, you don't want the killer, especially a low mobility killer like Clown, who would be using this. You want to make it harder for him to have to deal with this poor map mobility. Well, suddenly, if they end up doing that generator early, they create a zone of the map where you are able to contest them and chase a lot more effectively. You know, the main building is probably the strongest area on the map against Clown. This one of the second strongest areas of the map is the Killer Shack, which also can have a gen spawn. And if they do end up doing that generator, now you've made Killer Shack unplayable basically with that 5% haste on top of everything else. It's really, really crazy the influence we are already seeing just at the early to mid stages of the game. You know, Temple of Purgation. Temple of Purgation. They do the generator at the bottom floor. You've got it for top floor, bottom floor for at least half of it. You might have to rely on lingering effect, but ultimately that will be the difference, especially, you know, like you already see value there. Killer Shack, value at that part. All of the other tiles, typically along the way, some of the stronger ones have a generator nearby, which means you can either rely on the lingering effect or the proximity effect. It's great there. Mother's Dwelling, main building. You know, I'm trying to really go over at least a lot of these maps, at least in a general sense, because y'all, this is what I mean when I say actual versatility. Mother's Dwelling, main building, Killer Shack, the other tiles around it, some of the strong ones in the round, I think semi near the corners, you know, the jungle gyms with the generators, you definitely see those on Mother's Dwelling. You get batteries value there if those generators are done. And when survivors, and in a general sense, beyond just the maps themselves now, if survivors go near completed generators in order to punish your poor map mobility and take advantage of the fact that you are pressuring them because they are the most effective target due to aforementioned reasons, then you are able to make their ability to work for, or excuse me, do what their team needs, I should say. You are able to punish that through the use of this perk. And killers like Clown need this. Here's the thing. Killers like Clown need perks like batteries included, because I've always said where this game really struggles for enjoyment and also practical viability when it comes to killers like Clown is that generators go too quick, chases take too long. Make chases faster. We can probably talk about making generators, you know, not take as long as well. You know what I mean? It's all about you could say proportionality, I should say, for lack of a better term. But on the nature of proportionality, one of the biggest reasons killers like Clown do have to tunnel is because the proportionality is out of balance with respect to gen times and chase times. You know, chases take too long, and batteries included allows killers like Clown to play into their power, play into especially other perk choices, which we're about to get into, and take advantage of those survivor macro decisions, given that survivors control the initial direction of the chase, so that they can at least create pressure for themselves. And once the game pushes more in this direction, where killers that are on the lower end of the spectrum like Clown are able to get faster chases, you know, in a more reasonable manner, that's where you will suddenly start to see the dependence on tunneling, camping, play styles that survivors don't typically like to go against. You will see the reliance on that start to shift away. You know, but with respect to batteries included and what it does and how killers like Clown are able to make use out of it, let's talk about synergy with other perks. So we have batteries included providing its 5% haste. Other perks that typically Clown could run, or at least other killers in general, would be coup de grace, you know, rapid brutality, save the best for last. These are all perks where killers are able to take that 5% haste from batteries included, stack it with another 5% haste, run a perk that typically the killers that run batteries and who would be running batteries included would be dependent on for lunging. You know, these are the M1 killers, right? Like, M1 killers are typically the ones you will see running this 5% haste because it's effectively tier 1 bloodlust. You know, that's basically in principle, you break it all down, it's basically tier 1 bloodlust in proximity to a completed generator. Those are the killers who will be running this perk. So perks like Save the Best for Last, where you recover quickly and then you're able to chain and catch up to a survivor and then down them before they make it to a strong window or pallet. You know, especially if you're running Rapid Brutality and or Coup de Grace to get that lunge, right? Like these are basically areas where you get that benefit because especially if we're going to talk about Coup de Grace, especially if we're going to be talking about even just lunging in general. Lunging has a movement speed of 6.9 meters per second. Batteries included takes that up, if I really had to guess, probably around 7.2 meters per second. And if you have something like, let's say, batteries plus rapid brutality, you would be lunging at 7.5 meters per second. So it really does have an influence, and that's just looking at perks. You know, like I'm trying to be a little bit more universal here because I could focus more explicitly on clown. And I mean, if I were to just say that real quick, you know, if you look at batteries included, you have that 5% on top of the 10% from your yellow, and you know that gives you 15%. You will be lunging close to about 7.7, 7.8 meters per second. Yeah, the numbers start to get really, really crazy. And that's what these killers need. They need some crazy, especially if they are running builds like these that don't have perks like these. You know what I mean? Because that's kind of the problem right now. All right, the problem right now when it comes to why perks like batteries included are needed in Chase, especially given how they synergize with other perks, is that it, for one thing, changes the meta away from this. But because as it stands, playing clown is dependent on having fast chases and also just running super meta and hoping survivors can't deal with it. You know, typically what I actually do is I run literally this build. Franklin's is here for a reason. We'll get to that in a minute. But typically what I've been running up until for the longest time, like, or at least very recently, especially, is this build. Literally this build. Because as it stands, Clown is not able to deal with the type of pressure from really strong and efficient teams without slowing down the game, tunneling people out, stopping body blocks, and force penance. Okay? And batteries included is going to potentially enable to shift that if it allows Clown to have faster chases and influence how he's able to play out the game by creating pressure. You know, Clown creates pressure by having fast chases and pulling survivors to him on account of his lack of map ability. And on top of the map versatility, where it is just so effective on so many different areas, as I mentioned, and also having that synergy with perks like these, right? Save the Best for Last, Rapid Brutality, Coup, and everything in between. What also just makes it so strong is during the end game, it would have the benefit being applied to 2 extra generators. Because for those for basically for those that aren't entirely aware of it, survivors have to do 5 generators. And that would be 5 at base, 5 generators where batteries included applies its effect. However, there are always a total of 7 generators on the map in every single match. That is where 3-genning comes from. Because even though survivors have to do 5 generators, there are 2 extra generators as contestable objectives on the map for that final remaining generator. And so if survivors do that last remaining generator and not the other 2, the endgame phase always completes those other 2 generators and thus applies the effect of batteries included to it in the endgame. And this transcends that benefit. Everything that we have talked about, from the synergy to the versatility, this transcends that in a way that killers like Clown and other lower tier killers absolutely need. Because right now, one of the big problems, especially, let's go back to the current meta build I was just talking about. This perk is dead during endgame. This perk stops actually at 1 gen remaining. This perk literally will do nothing. This perk's dead after the first down. This perk provides consistent value. And, you know, let's assume we were running Force Penance here, as I was just talking about. That's it. You know, like, you're not really running, you're not getting much value at all from anything during the end stages of the game. And I think that is, in a more general sense, one of the biggest problems with what has held lower tier killers back is the fact that they have to put so much reliance on the earlier stages of the game that once things do reach that end stages of the game, they just literally don't have the support of anything in their kit in order to bring them back from it. And, of course, this also gets capitalized on exponentially when you look at perks like Hope, Adrenaline, MFT, lower tier killers with poor map mobility. I mean, to say like Clown, of course they can't compete with that, right? Like, of course that makes sense. But that is where a perk like Batteries Included would have been so great for a killer like Clown, because not only does it have that benefit that ramps up over the course of the game from 1 generator to 3 generators to even 5 generators, with that extra 2, you now have an in-game benefit. You have a perk that is doing something at that end game, something to give you that support and to close in whatever remaining pressure that is left. And the more Clown is able to do that effectively, in a sense, in a more nutshell sense, the less he has to rely on camping and tunneling. The better he is, the less he has to do that. And this goes for a lot of other killers too, of course, right? This goes for not only just lower tier killers, but other higher tier killers as well. I mean, you look at the S tier killers, what makes them able to not have to camp in tunnels as much as the lower tier killers is the fact that they do excel at having faster chases, and they do excel at having better map mobility. The lower tier killers don't have that. But here's the problem with Batteries Included in the endgame, is that as strong as that would be, it appears that the developers don't really like the potential that could be accomplished or achieved if you were to run Batteries Included with other in-game perks. Most notably, in fact, would be No One Escapes Death. So now the other in-game perks obviously are obviously they do matter too, but when it comes to what the developers had to say on Batteries Included, they here's what they had to say. They said there was a slight problem. When the last generator is powered, all generators when the last generator is completed, all generators become powered. I'm reading this a bit more practically. This made the perk far stronger than the in-game that was intended, especially on smaller maps and or paired with other perks such as Hex, No One Escapes Death. So basically, what happened is the developers not only didn't foresee that when all generators are completed, there are those 2 extra spawns that I was talking about, so 7 total generators that would be applying Batteries Included. But they also didn't take into account that 5% on top of NOED's 4%, on top of maybe killers who run No Way Out to stop the gates from being opened, and whatever snowball potential may come from that. And what this means is their decision to make Batteries Included not work in the end game, because that is what they said they wanted to do. They said, hey, the synergy that Batteries Included has with other end game perks, especially No One Escapes Death, that is all the reason that now Batteries Included needs to deactivate once the generators are all completed. The problem with them doing that is it completely neuters a lot of that versatility that I was talking about, because it limits its purpose. When you deactivate Batteries Included in the endgame, you have now turned the perk into a tunneling perk. That is literally what it now becomes. Because it now, like Deadlock, it becomes literally a perk. Presume this is Batteries Included. This is the closest thing I have preemptively to, have an icon for Batteries Included. When they make Batteries Included deactivate during the end game, what they are doing is they're turning it into a perk that serves a very similar purpose to Deadlock and Corrupt Intervention. It is a tunneling perk. It is a perk that is meant to get you value during the same stages of the game that every other perk has done before. That is all it will do. And because that is the way the state of the killers are during this time, you're just going to be tunneling and camping with it. That's it. It sounds terrible. And the funny thing is survivors, when they get tunneled, you know what they're going to do? If they're smart, especially, they're going to be running to completed generators. So it's going to be helping you with your tunneling. It's not like it's not going to be helping you with your tunneling, but given that it only works when the generators are active, that is the only real reason you have to use it. You can't afford to spread generators right now with how the pacing of the game currently is, especially with Corrupt and Deadlock, and you are going against strong and efficient survivors, survivors that know to employ chase tactics such as pre-running, pre-dropping. They communicate exactly which generators to do to break your 3-gen and force you into attrition. You know, there are macro tactics that strong survivors will employ that basically make it to where you have to tunnel. You can't afford to use batteries included by itself and rely on Corrupt and Deadlock to stall the game out for you to just go and spread hooks. You literally can't do that. And when the developers say it's now going to work in the end game, and you only, if let's say, assuming, look at this build specifically. This is a build, for one thing, that I would be running if I were to run batteries included after this new nerf that they're proposing, where it doesn't work during the end game. I will now have this perk not working, this perk not working, this perk not working when all of the generators are completed. Think about, for one thing, how shitty that feels. Do you think in general it feels great to play a killer, let alone a low tier killer, when the end game rolls around and you only have one fucking perk that does something? Like, think about how shitty that feels. Like, genuinely, I'm using profanity for the first time in this video because I want y'all to really put that in perspective. How fucking awful that feels. Playing a killer that not only is weak, and you have to put so much work in to perform well, but literally only has one perk in their build that is actually doing something. You know, no wonder killers like Clown, Tunnel, and Camp, because you have to take advantage of what you have to create the most pressure when you have it. And, you know, that's so funny. What's so funny about all that is I'm talking about just what we have when we have it. We're not even talking about what survivors don't have and what they do have when they have it, right? Because once these perks become inactive during the end stages of the game, think about what happens when survivors have perks like adrenaline or hope or resilience, especially together. Hope, especially, and resilience. Like, oh my gosh, how are you as a low tier killer supposed to handle that? Especially if you're just someone who isn't like me and doesn't run Q. The answer is you lose. The general answer is you do lose. Especially if, again, those other tactics like pre-running, etc., you do lose. Killers like Clown can't keep up because you can't counter the pre-running by using resources where you just have to reload again anyways, and then they use the speed boost to chain tiles. You know, like, you can't. That is basically the problem. The momentum swing from losing all of your perks in the end game, because now batteries included wouldn't even work, and your gen perks don't work. You can't come back from that, and that puts the impetus on tunneling to be even greater. Once the in-game stage of the match begins, any survivor that is not healing themselves, being healed by another survivor, or working on an exit gate has no reason not to be inserting themselves into your chases with their teammates. And this is going to make downing survivors and creating pressure during the in-game stage of the game borderline impossible, if not very difficult, if you are running builds like these and they do have access to those perks like hope and adrenaline, especially with resilience. And even if you do manage to hook somebody and you have to now stand and contest that hook, having access to those perks, as well as other base kit mechanics like the base kit BT, which will not only provide endurance, but that speed boost, is going to make it to where they can coordinate the unhook and you aren't going to be able to kill anybody. They're going to all run in sequence, body block fashion. You know, they call it the conga line. And everybody, you know, with decent experience as killer has seen it before. And it's a wrap. It's a loss. And that's basically what you are going to experience if you run this perk and you don't tunnel and camp with it, and as a result, you have survivors that are still alive. Now, all of this being said, when it comes to dealing with batteries included being a problematic in-game perk, and as far as to why the developers decided to nerf the perk, I do kind of think I understand where they are coming from, but I just think they went about seeking the wrong solution. See, what I think the developers are concerned about, gang, is builds like this right here, which would have some really absurd chase perk, right? You would have no way out to block the gates. you would have NOED for that 4% haste and instant down, and then we assume this is batteries included, giving you that 5%. The 5% would compound with the 4%, which could also have the instant down potential, topped with some other type of chase perk. You know, it doesn't have to be coup. It could be something that blocks windows, etc., etc. Anything that makes it more practical for you to take advantage of these other two perks and kind of skew the general game's design with respect to chase duration, that could be an issue that, even though lower tier killers would need that pressure, still isn't healthy for the game. Now, by comparison to meta builds like these, that's not to say this build doesn't at least have some good things. You know, there are some pros and some cons associated with this. I mean, for one thing, because you have no way out, killers aren't going to be tunneling with these builds. You know, you don't have to worry about someone being dead at 3 hooks usually if the killer's running no way out, unless just something very strange or egregious happens. Further, the lack of any generator, regression, or stall perks means that any repair progress survivors gain toward their objective is going to stick, and it is going to make transitioning toward the endgame seamless. You know, for example, this build right here, it doesn't have corrupt, it doesn't have deadlock, which means that survivors can spawn on their generators working in unison, and then when they are all done, you can pop 2 to 3 gens back to back. It doesn't have pop or pain res, so even if the killer running this build were to have fast chases, it doesn't mean that he is going to be able to push back the survivor's progress toward their objective and stop the end game from coming as quickly as it otherwise could. You know, that is basically the advantage of running instant regression and or stall perks, is they quite literally regress and or stall the survivor objective. So even if you are playing well without these perks, you aren't going to be creating that situation. Survivors will still basically be progressing toward their goal. But those are basically the two positive takeaways from a build like this by comparison to the current meta, right? You look at current meta builds, you know, that do run those perks I was just talking about, that do have corrupt and deadlock. Killers are tunneling with builds like these, and these builds undermine your objective, which feels pretty shitty to play against in both factors. You know, people don't like gaining progress towards something and then having it taken away. People don't like feeling as if they don't have a whole lot of agency or they don't really get to do much. And that is what comes from tunneling and slowdown. However, the problem with these builds, the main cons here, are that it's not going to be very fun to play against in a very small sense. So I want y'all to kind of like think about what killers, lower tier killers, have had to deal with as of recently when it comes to Hope and MFT. What's going to happen if builds like this were to become practical and viable, if not even really strong, is that now survivors have to start pushing MFT and Hope more. Well, not really MFT anymore, right? Hope and Adrenaline and Resilience, in-game perks, will become more necessary for survivors just to be able to keep up with that possibility. You know, if you are not running Hope and you go against a killer, like using Clown, for example, we haven't really, I've been a little bit more general in this video, but if you don't have Hope and you were to go against Clown with this build, with the unnerfed batteries included, you will just die. There will be nothing that you could otherwise do. You will go down instantly in one hit to a super lunge boosted by his power, and especially with batteries, it doesn't matter. There should literally, I don't think, be any tile in the game where the speed disparity from NOED plus batteries included, plus both uses of the power and the lunge, where you can get away from that. You know, and that is just using Clown as an example. And if survivors, in order to counter this change in the meta, start running these builds in turn, everyone else is going to suffer. Imagine you are a low tier killer who isn't running an in-game build and you're running a more meme build and you don't tunnel or camp. So you're in the same problem as these people with their stall, but you don't have anything to pull you through in the end. You're not going to have a fun time playing DBD. And it's going to create an arms race issue during the end game, is basically what's going to result from this. So I think that is what the developers were concerned about. Now, as far as fixing the issue, how is it, if nerfing batteries included is not the right call, what could the developers do to make the in-game healthy for both sides while also preventing batteries included from taking things too far out of control? In my opinion, The problem is Hex no one escapes death. So for the longest time, this perk has existed as a very necessary perk for both newer players and lower tier killers alike. However, if batteries included is going to be introduced to the game in a healthy manner, something does need to be done about this 4%. See, this 4% with that 5% with the exposed instant down, that is a massive swing of momentum. And it's something that the developers, I believe, when they designed No One Escapes Death, they were not planning on the release of another perk that would go along with it in such a manner, right? Like, I don't think, obviously, the developers released No One Escapes Death with the 4%, expecting to release batteries included however many years later with its 5%. So what I think the developers could do is they could take away the 4% completely. So in other words, what this perk would do is it would apply the exposed effect during the end game. It would also still could maintain its surprise effect, but the only haste that you would gain with the combo of batteries and No One Escapes Death is from batteries. You would be moving 5% faster, and you would obviously need to be near those generators. To compensate, what they could do is they could look at the aura reveal. They could make it to where probably it's weaker and or non-existent, since the only thing the totem would be doing is applying exposed in the in-game, and that's it. But I think that would be a better direction. See, when you look at batteries, if batteries only gave 5% haste and NOED didn't give haste, that would present counterplay for survivors. Survivors could run hope, and hope would now overtake the benefit gained from batteries included. You would still have the instant down potential, and you could still run some chase perks to make, the speed from batteries along with the instant down from NOED more practical. But there is more agency that will now be there for the survivors, because keep in mind, if there isn't some extreme speed disparity between survivors, and the only thing NOED is providing is the instant down threat, that means as long as you as a survivor play well in chase and you don't get hit, then you are going to fare a whole lot better. The problem with having the 4% speed from NOED along with the 5% from batteries is that even I would assume even with hope, there's just going to be still no agency during the end game. You're going to have to go near a generator. Like there's just basically no way you avoid a generator with the 12-meter radius that becomes that 24-meter diameter, and there are 7 total generator spawns. You also take into account how so many strong tiles have a generator near them, right? Main buildings, a lot of main buildings are strong tiles across many maps, and those will have a completed generator now during the end game. Killer Shack, completed generator if it was nearby. Inside, outside, that's a problem for you if you're a survivor. Objectively, you do not have agency when both of these perks are stacking against you, even if you have hope, even if you have resilience. So that's what I think the developers should do. Remove the 4%, keep the exposed, do something about possibly the R reading and compensation, so that way the perk isn't completely dead in the water. Because, I'll even say this, if this only applied the exposed, it didn't apply the speed, and it had that R reveal, this perk is borderline fucking useless. So they would need to do something about that. But that would allow builds like this to be healthy. Because killers could run this, they would still have a power spike in the late game that I think would be pretty prevalent, but they don't have to worry about now influencing the meta in such a way for both sides, where if you aren't now running builds like these, you won't compete in the end game. Because again, just to summarize and wrap things up, if this becomes popular and this becomes overbearing, it were to, because they were not to nerf it, that would mean that survivors are going to start running more hope. They're going to start running more in-game perks. And that means that you as the killer, if you are running meta perks and you are not tunneling and camping, or if you are running meme builds that don't have the regression slowdown, and you don't happen to play extremely well, and you don't have to just somehow take the survivors out when the end game rolls around, in both of those situations, you will have no agency as a killer. You won't be able to kill anybody because you won't be able to catch them. And similarly, they're going to be in and out in like 30 seconds. They're going to get the gates open and they're going to spring out, Any pressure that you gained is going to be null and void because you didn't kill anybody. And in that situation, that will then be all that matters, is how many people are dead before endgame comes around. So yeah, that is my thoughts on batteries included. I hope y'all enjoyed. I think I've basically discussed everything that I believe comes to the top of my head and is necessary. If you like videos like these, I try to produce educational content both on Clown and DBD whenever it comes to mind. I also do upload my highlights as well. If you are interested in my stream and where I pull game highlights for Clown, I'll have a link to my stream in the description. And if you're curious about how to play Clown better, I have a very detailed Clown guide if you haven't heard of it. And I'll also have a link to that in the description too. But other than that, I hope y'all enjoyed my thoughts in this video, and I'll see y'all next time. Later, gang.